Matt, welcome to the AWS for Data Show.
Thanks, Andy.
So you are the Senior Vice President of Linguistic AI at RWS. Let's break that up a bit. Can you please explain to our viewers what is Linguistic AI and what you do as the Senior Vice President at RWS?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks for having me here today, Sandy. Linguistic AI is a portfolio of products that covers quite a large gamut of use cases. So we have, on the one end, B2B offerings. This is a suite called Trados, and this we sell to enterprises and governments to help manage huge localization translation projects. As part of that, we have another offering called Language Weaver, and this is it's a neural machine translation platform. And a neural machine translation platform is something that we built 8 years ago. So this is, feels odd to say, but this is a legacy or traditional AI. It's not generative AI. And this is about machine translating, automated translation of vast amounts of content. And thirdly, we have our B2C offering, which is called Trados Studio. And this is a platform where linguists, translators can spend their day and be effective and productive as a translator. So what do? I'm head of this product portfolio, so I look after the product management and the R&D for taking all of these products to market.
Thank you. I mean, we had some interaction before this podcast, and language translation business sounds really interesting to me. There's so many interesting use cases that you are working on at RWS, and we'll dive into some of them today.
Indeed, there are, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Steven, thank you very much for joining me in this show. You and I work closely with our software and SaaS businesses in the UK and Ireland. For our viewers, can you explain what you do as an AIML specialist?
Well, thank you, Sandy, for having me. My name is Steven. I'm part of the specialist organizations in AWS. Essentially, what I do is we help enterprise software companies to help them to grow their business with our AI solutions and services across the stack. Essentially, you could think of me as we ran a team of individuals, of specialists, that helps to every level of our organizations, from ideation to experimentation, so even building best practices, when the customers are going to production. So one thing very unique about what my role is we get a chance to build not just about AI use cases for internal consumption, but also how do we embed these AI capabilities as part of the product software that's customer facing. So that's a bit of unique about what I do within AWS.
Nice. I'm pretty sure you've been very busy recently with generative AI.
Yes, quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Matt, so if I build an online course and I build it in English and I wanted to reach out to audiences that speak other languages, would your product be helpful in terms of translating my online course into other languages?
Absolutely. So you're going to be thinking, I need to reach more audience, and your example there is an online learning, so this is potentially some post-sale content, but equally it might be your website, it might be your marketing material, it could be your user guides, your community forums, it could be your data labels for your latest drug, etc. There's a huge range of different types of content which would all need different outcomes. So if we look to your training there, you'd have three things on your mind. How do I optimize the cost? How do I optimize the turnaround time and the quality? And that's what we're doing every day of the week. It's bringing the right technology and the right service level in order to give you the right output for your training, which will be different from what you need for your marketing or your community. There'll be a different balance of human and machine. So that's what we do. We look to provide the full spectrum of services and tech-enabled services and tech only to meet all of the needs of our customers and their content.
This is really interesting because when I was thinking about this example, right, I was just thinking about translating the course. But what you have said is there's a full spectrum, like how do I market it to those audiences? Mm-hmm. So that's a different kind of translation that you would need to do. And then, there might be post-sales. So how I market, how I deliver the content, how I collect feedback. So there's a whole journey where the translation will be required, not only at the core course level.
Yeah.
And that's what you cover for every businesses in other industries that needs this kind of services.
Absolutely, and for all of the effort that you put into creating the right course, that can be undone by not translating into a local language where your audience can properly engage with the content that you've created.
So interesting. It is quite evident now that generative AI is transforming organizations in every sector.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure it's happening in your organization as well. Can you give us some examples or just explain what is changing in your organization and how generative AI is bringing those changes?
Generative AI is providing, it's a massive step change. We were talking earlier about how, the localization and the data industry has been pretty flat in terms of innovation. Gen AI, as such a universal tool, it means that it's got a use case for everybody. Use case for data, use case for linguistics, use case for a million other types of business. But I think what they all have in common in the early days of generative AI is that the focus tends to be on how do we save some costs. And that's the easiest way to approach it because you can still bring the human in to that. And that's how I think the best use cases are really showing the most value at the moment. One example from our point of view, we recently released a capability called Evolve. And what that does is it pieces together a lot of our existing and new technology. So what it does is for your, let's say your training course that you've got here, it would run a neural machine translation to translate everything with the machine. Then the first clever thing it does is it uses an LLM to go and figure out which of those machine translation sentences is good and which is poor. Now the good ones, that's where we get a cost saving because that doesn't need to see another human, potentially. And then what was not good, that can go to a second LLM and we see if we can improve it using that LLM. So we're minimizing the amount of work which a human needs to get involved with. Now that's great because number one, we're, as I said, good use cases at the moment are about reducing cost, but also we keep that sort of fail-safe of having a human in the loop to sort of guide this. And we sort of see AI here as being a sort of a digital colleague, just somebody with their own skills that's come into the team, and we use that for scaling and for the sort of that sort of work, whereas the creativity still sits with the human. So that's where we are today, and that's where I see all the really good use cases. In the future, I think that we move to something which is much more about generating content. So when you're generating content, we can be approaching use cases where we're looking to drive revenue, not just reducing costs. So for your training course, if you could talk to me in my language, and you could talk to me as my demographic, you could talk to me knowing something about me personally, that's going to make me engage that much more to purchase your training and then after sale to stay loyal and engaged with you. So I think that's maybe the sort of nuanced change that I could see in the next year or so, moving from pure cost saving and moving towards some revenue generating use cases as well.
This is so incredible. So what you're saying is with content generation side, and taking the example of my online course, if I wanted to do an online course on generative AI, for example, and if I wanted to target it to teenagers and then to technical experts, to professionals, to elders, right? Then I can actually use the same course to create different content for different demographics, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. Why not change the content, the speech in it, but also there might be some graphics, some images that you're using, which would be better engaging your different audiences if you changed those and made them more culturally appropriate.
This is going to be so interesting for content creators as well, right?
Absolutely.
I think this is a communication business, right? So you're in the language business. How do you see generative AI evolving the social communication and social constructs around communication?
I think the change is going to be huge. And the first is, I mentioned our Evolve capability. Now that's all about getting more content through. It's not about necessarily reducing the cost, it's about reducing unit costs so you can translate more, which means that more of the global audience will be able to engage with you as a global business in their language. Now, engaging with me in my language boosts my likelihood to convert. It makes me feel much more loyal to your brand. I'll stay around. I'll be supported better. So more individuals globally will be better linked to your brand with better, more localized content. I think that's the biggest change. Even before we start thinking about, well, we could generate content in order to be more applicable to you or to your demographic or your culture. That's all great stuff. But I think immediately, and this is, we only released Evolve a month ago, and already we've got great benefits with some key customers that really show that the customers we're talking to don't necessarily want to save the cost. They want to drive more content and get more engagement from their growing global audience.
Amazing, amazing. I mean, I'm so interested in your business now and how it's going to change social communication, thinking from different perspectives, businesses, content creators, we watch YouTube videos, we make a lot of content through AWS like this one, and how language translation services can really revolutionize this whole space is really...
One thing I'd add, Sandy, if you don't mind, is this is a really good example of how different content types need different outcomes. So this video we do here isn't necessarily going to need the same treatment as a glossy AWS advert or something you're going to put on the screen at the summit tomorrow. Right? These all have different outputs and different amounts of investment you want to make. So having the spectrum of services and technology so that you get the right outcome with the right cost, time, and quality is absolutely key. And that's generative AI is really helping us with that.
Fantastic. Yes. So Steve, you spend most of your time with customers working on nowadays generative AI use cases. What are the major trends that you observe in customers who are able to successfully implement them in production?
Yeah, right. Well, thank you for the questions. So, there's primarily, I think there are three buckets I see specifically around enterprise software companies. Well, first off is almost low-hanging for the whole optimization, the internal efficiency aspect, which is, there's a lot of use cases around documentation. How do you retrieve, a lot of the insights within your organizations much more quickly, or even language translation for that matter. So that's kind of the first bucket. And the second piece is really around kind of the product innovation, right? In a way that is, how do you start using these generative AI or LLM models to make your software to be a lot more user-friendly, a lot more personalized. So when I say personalized, not necessarily just about humanized chatbot. What I'm referring to is that organizations actually building this layer of interactions where traditionally, let's say you need a technical audience or you need a specific domain to exercise on the software. Now they could actually use this much more natural language way for them to interact with the software. So what that really means from a benefits perspective for software companies is actually creating new stickiness. It's actually creating a new demographic of audience where they could start using this software. So that's kind of the second bucket that we're seeing in terms of product innovation. And then lastly, I think it's a really hot topic right now is about democratizing insight. When I say democratizing insight, it's not necessarily just, hey, you have data just sitting somewhere in the cloud you couldn't access to. But it's also about how to extrapolate domain insights from humans, from humans' mind. Because one of the things that we start working very closely with across different organizations is they want to begin to start building this kind of internal intelligence search type of capability where you can have different departments from finance, HR. They all want to have their own model that could effectively help them to do their job much quicker. So throughout that process is essentially you have to have that domain knowledge from a finance person, from an HR person, so then you could start training up this model. So the other aspect I definitely start seeing is also democratizing. So you're not introducing a single point of failure and also building longevity for the organizations in terms of the domain knowledge that stays in the organization. So at least those are the kind of three buckets that I consistently see as an overall theme right now.
Right.
We have a natty little way of describing that, Stephen. So we talk about AI, artificial intelligence and human intelligence becoming genuine intelligence.
Yes.
So, and that's about I mentioned before, bringing that digital colleague into your team,
Yeah.
but treating them as you would anyone
Yeah.
with their own, strengths and weaknesses. But just the technology on its own, which misses out all of that creativity and the subject matter expertise, is a real mistake.
Yeah, exactly.
Genuine intelligence, did you say?
Genuine intelligence.
Genuine intelligence.
That's a nice term. It's the first time I've heard about it. But yeah, just to uncover on so you said that bringing domain knowledge from different departments, right, and putting my data architect hat on, what I'm thinking is that translates into bringing data from different departments, bringing some, creating this unified view of data, and that means you would either create pipelines that bring data from different parts. And what that means is that you need to do some sort of, you have to build some sort of platform that kind of modernizes the way you handle data, make sure that data is of quality. Is that what you're observing organizations doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the things I'm seeing a lot is, especially last year, a lot of experimentation, a lot, including RWSs. But now we're start talking about how do you put into production. So if you start thinking about this capability, you really want to take it at scale. It doesn't matter you're enterprise software or not. You have to make sure that you have the right data to feed into this model, right? Because you want the most accurate data to continue to get the most accuracy of this model. So in a way that I begin to start seeing a lot of customers that, hey, yes, now we have a proven case of a Gen AI capabilities, and they begin to start really looking into what we call it the working backward process of looking into, hey, do I have the right data infrastructure to support this capability, which could potentially drive revenue or in optimizations internally. So
I think that the fascinating thing about Gen AI, which is different to any other innovation that I've been a part of, is that the technology itself is pretty repeatable. It's all on the cloud. Thank you very much. All of the LLMs are publicly available, and you can prompt it. So any engineer or anybody who can type can get an output from this. But what that does mean is that technology can, to a certain extent, be repeated. And there's two things which are the uniqueness. It's finding the value so that the use case you're driving is actually going to be worth something in the end to your customers, and the data. So the data which isn't in the foundational model, that's the moat, that's the secret sauce that we're all adding to our own offerings that we're taking to market.
And this is why we say your data is your differentiator, right?
There you go.
the new oil.
Yeah. Talking about data, and talking about data being your differentiator, how do you make sure that the data is of high quality? Because ultimately you're going to train your models on that high quality data. What are the steps that you take to ensure you are training your models on high quality data? Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is that we're not in the business, as the vast majority, I would say, of people watching this and people in industry, we're not in the business of building LLMs. The amount of investment that it takes is mind-boggling, and there's plenty available out there. So what we're not doing is building those, but what we are doing is very carefully choosing the LLM or the LLMs, plural, that we are going to use. So we look at the LLMs predominantly in Bedrock. That's where we look first. And we're looking at how those providers are sourcing their data for their foundational model, how they are cleansing that, how they're weeding that for undesirable content like bias or hate or misinformation, all that sort of stuff. And we're looking to make sure that we make the right choice at that foundational level, because anything that you do on top of that is a waste of time if you haven't got the right foundational model. So that's our first thing that we do. And the second is, once we have that and we establish what the guardrails are and where the data came from for the training from the provider of the LLM, then we look to our engineers. And we provide training and guidance for our engineers to be sort of doing a belt and braces approach, right? So we're assuming that the input and the output of the LLM is going to be, for want of a better word, clean, unbiased, no hate speech and no inaccuracies. But in reality, of course, there will be. So the rest of that we clean up in clever prompting to make sure that we are removing those as outputs as well as the input to the LLMs.
So that raises another question in my mind. You're talking about content that might not be preferable to every audience, right? And in that scenario, and considering that your services reach out to different regions, different customers and audiences, speaking different languages, how do you address ethical concerns with data privacy and regional context? Some regions might prefer some sort of content compared to other regions. Right?
Yeah, we sort of look at it as a sort of a pyramid of data. So you have your foundational at the base, and then you might have some training that we do to enhance the foundational model, which might be for an industry. Okay, that you might then have something which is for a horizontal use case, and then at the top you might have something which is specifically for that customer. So we look, as we then train on that foundational model, we look to make sure that we're using the data that we have in the right place. So if it's just industry terminology that's going to be open to all users in the automotive or in the pharma industries, then we'll build that, and now suddenly we've got a model which accounts for a certain industry. But if it's something that we're taking from a customer specifically, then we make sure that we only output that for that particular customer as well. So we do that in a few ways. The first thing is that we try to minimize the amount of fine-tuning. And the reason for that is that we have lots of different requirements for LLMs, and we're certain that we're not going to, even in the future, have one LLM which meets all of our needs. So our particular need is about multilingual knowledge, so where the foundational data came from and what languages were included. So we know in the future, as more LLMs pick up more and more long-tail languages, that we'll need to add more LLMs to our stack, which means that if we fine-tuned one, we've got to fine-tune the rest, and that becomes a big investment. So we really try to limit our training to two main things. One is we use synthetic data and our own teams to do annotation. So if you think about that quality estimation component of the evolve capability I talked about before, that's all about synthesizing a human decision to allow a machine to say whether that machine translation was good or not. So what we do is we generate tens of thousands of machine translations, and we give it to our linguists to annotate as either being good or not good. I'm going to work on it, or I'm not going to need to work on it. And so that data is universal. We can use, that's our data, it's synthetic, and it's our own resources annotating it. So we'll use that for everybody. But we also have a layer which is, we use retrieval augmented generation, which means if I'm working for you on your training content, everything I've done for you previously, we have a database of all of those translations. We've also agreed with you what terminology is in your training and how you'd like that translating in different languages. Which means that for you, when we do our prompts, we would look for examples of good translations from that database. We'd look for allowable terminology. We'd include that in the prompt, so we get a much more specific and accurate translation and decision from the AI than we would from our general model. You would have, as another customer, a different set of translation memories, that database and terminology. And so we'd use the right one at the right time. So data is hugely important to us and to our customers, and we are absolutely committed to make sure that by adding new innovation, we're not poking a hole in how we've been able to control data previously.
Yeah. Sounds like you're not just leveraging LLMs, it's like the whole pipeline to make this whole thing work.
That's right.
From the vector database, RAG, and so forth.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's about choosing the right technology at the right time. If we just threw everything in LLM, we'd get a result. It would be a worse result, and it would have cost us a fortune to create. So, lose.
Yeah.
What is fascinating to me is you are using machines to generate data, like generate translation of original content, and then you're using linguists who are humans to check that content, okay some of that, and then you use that as a feed to your models.
Yep.
And then they generate another set of data which are of higher quality, and that's how you ensure data quality.
Absolutely. If you think about our data flow and our process flow, which goes through the entire supply chain, so we have a privileged access to every single touch point in this whole transaction. The number of loops that we're now building in is incredible, and that's something we're really striving to do, to make sure that none of the data goes to waste. You know, there are uses for all of this data. We need to find them.
And the retrieval augmented generation pattern that you talked about is basically, what you're saying is that, taking my online course as an example, if I create a really highly technical online content as a course, like configuring security for something, and it's really, really deep technical, then you can actually use translations which go at deep technical level. Explaining how to configure security through IAM for a particular service on AWS, and translating it from English to other languages, then you can use this contextual data stored somewhere in the database to meet that level of depth in the technical accuracy.
Absolutely. So, you know, in your, if you're doing a course on security, then you'll have firewall, let's say.
Yeah.
And for this particular bit of content, your terminology would make sure that probably you wouldn't translate that. If we went into French and German, I'm not a linguist myself, so I've got no idea what firewall is in French and German, but let's imagine it's just firewall, right? Whereas if we were doing this for your construction safety business, right, we're going to need to translate that as the wall's on fire. You know, so yeah, definitely context makes a big difference for the outputs.
So your business has got global reach, right? So considering the global reach of a translation service business like yours, how do you ensure inclusivity and cultural sensitivity?
Mm-hmm. So inclusivity is a massive one for me personally. We're a leader in what we do, and so I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we do that. In my grander moments, I think this is you know, leave no translator behind. Right? This is something that needs to be universal, and that's something we look at all the time. But the approach that I take is that because everything is in the cloud for us, natively in the cloud, it means that once we build it, in order to make it inclusive, it's just how we then take that to market, how we take that to users, how we deploy it. But all of the smarts, all of the integration of Gen AI or whatever it is done in the cloud, and then the challenge is just getting it to the individuals at the end. So, for example, we spend a lot of time building a hybrid model for translators, similar to Office, where you can work online or you can work on your desktop. Now that's great for a preference, but it's really powerful for if you're in a region which has unstable communications or unpredictable power. So the ability to choose whether I'm going to work locally, completely offline, or I'm going to go online, that's they're not just a preference, that's necessity. We also think about, I've talked about, you know, the next billion internet users are going to be speaking a different language to the first billion. Now, that means that there aren't necessarily big communities of those translators, professional translators with our technology waiting to jump. So we need to look down the line and think, okay, customers who want to go global truly and pick up the next billion internet users are going to need completely different languages. So they're going to need completely new community of linguists who are going to need a completely new set of tools based on the same cloud with all of the same features, but we just surfaced it to them in a different way that makes sense for them because they haven't necessarily been to university for 4 years to learn how to use our desktop tools. We need to provide something much more simple and approachable for people who are just picking up translation because they're bilingual, and that, you know, globalizing companies need to engage with users, their customers, in that language. So it's quite complicated, and you've got to sort of look 3 steps down the line in order to figure out what we're going to do today. But that's our approach. Build everything in the cloud natively, without any exception, and then figure out how to bring people in, new communities of users as we go to make it inclusive.
Yeah, it's actually great to hear, Matt. It's what the steps that you're taking in terms of, you know, building that inclusivity around your end audience. So I'm just curious, what are some of the challenges that you might or maybe already facing?
Yeah, I think the main one is that the translation industry is pretty much set in stone. We've been doing this for 30 years. Everyone knows the tools, everyone knows the linguists, and all of the companies who are going global know how to do that. The issue is that we now have a new paradigm with new users who speak different languages where there aren't big communities of translators already. So you're sort of trying to build the community at the same time as you're trying to market to that community. You're trying to build awareness that this community is needed. And you've got somebody in a sort of what we call a long tail language who's sitting there and needs to understand, well, here's a career option for me. I speak these two languages. This company is interested in that. How do I get involved? So finding those individuals, Stephen, is obviously that's the difficulty, and how you build a community from scratch in order to meet what we think is going to be a coming demand.
Almost like a chicken and egg question.
It's absolutely a chicken and egg. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So we want to be ready once your big globalizing customers are ready to go into those emerging markets. I'm thinking there, Africa. I'm thinking Southeast Asia. I'm thinking India. These are places which have traditionally been served by English, Hindi in India, whereas there are dozens and dozens of languages which people want to be engaged in.
Makes sense.
The power of communities, right? So you mentioned, I think I find two parallels to our work, and Steve would know about it, and how you think about in your business. The power of communities, we leverage power of communities when it comes to leveraging open source technologies on AWS, or even the internal technical field communities that we have got. The other is the long-term thinking, right? Thinking about who are the future audience for your business. As architects and specialists, we think on behalf of our customers for the long term. We believe in long-term thinking, and I just wanted to mention it because I totally find parallels on your thinking and how we think about businesses and helping customers out, so which really resonates. Working with organizations, especially in the data field, what I've observed is one of the biggest challenges they face is setting the right culture and mindset for being data driven. Right? When you work with your customers, first of all, what do you see the challenges that they face, and how do you advise them in setting the right culture, not only for data but also for the AI strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, ultimately, I think yes, you have to establish the right culture, and also the data literacy is pretty much the foundations of implementing any type of AI solutions. But one thing for sure is not a one-day thing; it's a journey of itself. But fundamentally, I think there's kind of three typical areas that I'm seeing that we usually start off those conversations. One is obviously around the whole data-driven culture. A lot of organizations, especially in the past decade, this is not just an AI thing, right? Everybody, hey, we got to make our decisions much more data-driven. But in reality, what has happened, what I've seen is a lot of organizations, are we just building more reports? Like more SQL reports to help customers. But in reality, I think what customers really need to think about is actually embedding these type of specific data capabilities into part of the business process. So in a way, what I'm really trying to say is like, how do you empowering this group of business users or engineering users or technical users to do what they do on a daily basis? So, I mean, that's actually quite aligned with our overall data product or AI product strategy. For those of you familiar in the audience, we have services specific for data scientists. We are specifically for ML engineers, or even for analysts, for business analysts who are non-technical. They could still leverage these capabilities around machine learning and AI. So that's definitely one way of how we are helping or actually communicating to help our customers of embedding these right tools into part of the business process that they do. So that's kind of number one. The second piece is really around innovations and collaboration. So one of the key things that we really encourage organizations is, how do you stop fail fast, right? It's part of the Amazon culture, right? How do we work it backward, right, with specific problems that we have? And I know not organizations really are embracing that culture, but in a way that what we are trying to do is encourage organizations to collaborate across different teams, from product managers, from data scientists, from business stakeholders, from engineers, work together to come up, toward a particular challenge or business use cases. And that's the one reason why within AWS, since last year, we actually created something, what we call it the Gen AI Solution Launchpad, where we intentionally grouping this group of people together. How could you start building out a Gen AI MVP in the span of 30 days? And that has been really successful here in London. And that's the second piece. And the third piece, I think, really comes down to leadership support. Because one of the key aspects is, I think we're all looking at a lot of different hypes and commercials and advertising around, hey, what AI could do for you. But I think that leadership has to really setting the right tones and priority. What does this really AI initiative really means as organizations? And in a way, I think to simplify it, I think there's twofold. One fold is let's making sure that to address the fear within a lot of the employees, because when it comes to AI, hey, is it really going to take over my job, right? But in reality, and I'm sure many of the leadership teams I've spoken to, it's about optimization, right? So in a way that I recommend a lot of the organizations is, all right, now you could do your job much quicker. What are additional things that they could really do? And with the ongoing training. So in a way, you are actually enabling new capabilities that could enhance the career and do their job much better. So that's kind of number one. The other piece is really about how do you over-communicate? Because when there is an AI project internally, within an organization, how do you begin to talk about successes within these AI projects? So then the rest of the organizations actually recognize, hey, there was a beginning and there's a result, and clearly how does that being rewarded or recognized within organizations. So in a way, those are kind of few things that I see is really critical. So in a way, if you kind of read between the lines, it's not really about technology at all. It's about people and processes and how people and processes integrate with data and technology.
I think that's such a good point, Stephen, about the people being at the center of this. I think anybody who's thinking, well, implement the technology, pocket costs savings from the workforce is really missing the point. And in our industry, it's quite easy to think about what those people will do with the extra time. They'll do more translation. There's more content to be translated today than ever. There's more types of content. There's your video as well as the text, and there's more languages that need to go into. So for our industry, it's fairly easy to understand. But yeah, the needing to have leadership figure out what people do with those extra hours they're provided, where's the value going to come from, is absolutely key.
Yeah.
I want to pick on one of the points that Steven mentioned about leadership support. In your organization, Matt, as the Senior Vice President, what kind of support do you provide as leader to your team to ensure that they are data-driven, to ensure that they are making decisions based on data?
Yeah, I think the first thing I can do is provide time and capacity for these things. So, in any organization of engineers, there's going to be a huge interest in Gen AI. It's new, it's exciting, it's the potential is endless. So finding capacity and time amongst already full roadmaps is absolutely crucial. We run hackathons internally. We run hackathons with AWS. We do all sorts of things, as well as carving out time and carving out capacity in the roadmap to get it done. So you talked about calling out success. That goes all the way to the R&D. That it's not just a pet project. If you're going to write something and invest your time in building something as an innovation, let's get that thing into the product. Let's make a commitment that if you build it and there's value to it to our customers, that it'll get into the product. Yep. Second thing, in terms of specifically data, would be that I talked about having our technology touch the entire supply chain from fully from A to B and all the way back again. that means that individuals who are writing features along the way aren't necessarily so aware or thinking about what's happening downstream and upstream. So I think what I and my managers definitely try to do is take a bit of a 30,000-foot view to try and link up data that we're capturing with potential where that data could be an input elsewhere. And we talked before about these loops that we've got going throughout our data flow now. So that's sort of the additional piece that I look for from me and my management team, which is, let's really think about data as the differentiator, as our moat, and let's not waste a scrap of it. Let's find out how we can drive value for the customers from it.
Makes sense. Fantastic. So, enablement, giving time and space to interested individuals in your organizations, engineers who are interested in generative AI, make stuff available for them to experiment, build their experimentation culture. Is what is key. I get from your points.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Nice. Moving on. I wanted to get into the process part of the stuff, right? So when we talk about data strategy, obviously we look at it from three main lenses: the people, culture, mindset, and then the processes and technology. So when it comes to processes, you being a software business, you build software products. Every software product has got its product development life cycle. I work with customers who use data to inform product decisions. So whether you're improving a product, whether you are adding new features, you can really be data-driven on that. I mean, within AWS, we are really data-driven on how we feed customer feedback into product roadmaps. I'm interested to understand what you do in your organization in this space.
Yeah, so we try to collect as much data as possible. We try to interact with customers as much as possible. We have programs like Voice of the Customer, where we reach out to our customers. We do analysis of our communities. What are people saying about our products? Where are the hotspots? We analyze all of our win-loss reports. And in fact, we use Gen AI to go and filter those now. We used to do this manually by eye. And now, we look for sentiment analysis and identifying hotspots in all of these things, which is very effective. And we're always trying to figure out how to collect more data. So we've recently implemented a digital adoption platform as part of Trados, which means that we don't have the data yet, but over time it will start to build up an amount of telemetry in how customers use our product, where the blockers are, where the golden paths are that we should make more obvious, where are the problems and the blockers. So trying to squeeze out all of the information from many data sources as possible and creating new data sources. We're always looking at ways to find out how our customers are using what we provide for them.
When you work with customers and run these AIML projects, what sort of data points do you use to inform your decisions on where the project should go, how to guide the customer? How are you data-driven in your processes?
Yeah, you'll be actually surprised. The AI project's not much different compared to any data project. But typically there are few points, data points to your point, on what we're looking at. First is obviously from a business goal and KPI perspective. If let's say you want to solve customer satisfaction or customer experience or even operation efficiency, do you actually have the right relevant data to actually address that? Because so essentially is working backward from a business goal. Then the second piece is really around kind of the quality of the data. Because if let's say you want to implement a features around real time, do you actually have the right quality data continuously feeding back to you or creating kind of the loop to update the latest conversational chatbot you have? Keep going back to the same use case. But essentially that is one of the use cases, right? You need to have a ongoing learning platform and having the right data quality to meet the needs of the use cases. Then thirdly, and which is particularly very important in EMEA, is the regulatory type of data. About the data that meets the regulatory, because I work with a lot of regulatory type of software companies that sell to these, from banking and to government and so forth. Are you actually exposing the right data into, for the right outcome that you're looking for. So that is definitely, being very seriously looked at. And then lastly, but not the least, is when it comes to like generative AI, one thing that you could for sure is that your first implementations is not going to be your final implementation. So what is that data that you're getting, the feedback you're getting from your customers, that allows you to continue to build into the product roadmap that you have? How could you start articulating and collecting that data in a way that what you're saying, to build up on the future roadmap or features that you have? Because if you ask me, I think the future of generative AI, one of the key trends is how could you start building these capabilities as quickly as possible? But all in all, I would say, luckily, because for many of the audiences, if you're already building on the cloud, you have the flexibility to just switch on and switch off of looking across different capabilities and access to various different data. And at the same time, you have different deployment options very easily as well, right? You could choose managed service as well as you want to manage your own infrastructure, decide making decisions all the way down to the silicon level. You could also do that. So I guess that's the beauty of building out the product on the cloud, and you'll get all that obviously on AWS.
Mm-hmm. Right. Talking about technology and product choices, right? The data and AI space is pretty wide, right? We have got different tools, services, all offering unique capabilities. For customers like you, I'm pretty sure you are bombarded with marketing messages from different vendors and providers, right? Now you're in a position where you make decisions on which product to use, which service to use. What are the top, let's say, 3 points in your mind when you make a rational decision on a technology choice? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, for a start, I think your last point about the cloud being absolutely integral to this. If it wasn't for being able to provide this technology in the cloud, I wouldn't be providing generative AI. 999 out of 1,000 businesses would not be doing that. If I had to put my own infrastructure together, I had to go and collect my own data. I had to train my own. I just don't have those hundreds of millions, right? So the fact that this is available in the cloud is the first thing that has enabled all of these decisions. Now, when I look then at what LLMs are available in the cloud, I think you had three vectors which really allow you to differentiate between them. One is the cost, optimizing for cost. The second is the quality or the intelligence or the output that you're going to get, and third is privacy. So unless you go for the full Monty, right, you get everything which is going to cost, then you're always going to have a dilemma or a trilemma to figure out where your priorities lie. And for me, it's not one answer for one question, right? For every use case, there could be a different LLM at the end of it. And it's why I think I said earlier that we tried to move away from fine-tuning and try and do as much with the foundational model plus RAG plus our own annotated data without fine-tuning, because in my mind, we will have to have, and I expect many people with multiple use cases will have to choose multiple LLMs. So if I've got one use case which is providing access to my documentation, I don't care about privacy. All of that documentation is perfectly available to anybody to download and read. So I'm not going to pay the extra to have an enterprise-grade, fully private model. So I can choose a model which is much cheaper, less privacy. That model is potentially going to reuse that data for training. That's fine, and that's my model there. Over here, I've got some regulated customer with data that needs to be well protected, that we need to take special care of. So now I'm going to be thinking, well, I need an enterprise solution, for example, something that I'm going to pull from Bedrock. And I'm going to be careful about the choice that I make about how that data was collected by the foundational modeler and what the guardrails are, etc. And I'm going to be happy to pay for that because my customers are going to pay for that. So the idea that there's a spectrum of use cases, a spectrum of outcomes, and therefore a spectrum of LLMs, which will provide more or less of those 3 things: intelligence, privacy, and cost. So it's a complicated answer, Sandy, but that's where we are. I'm afraid that I think from my point of view, and I think it will become a universal view, is that you're never going to have, if you've got anything like a complex set of use cases, then you're going to not be able to lump that all into one choice.
No, I can totally relate to that. So as an architect, we make choices, and there's never one perfect choice. There's always trade-offs. So, in your case, you keep cost, privacy, intelligence as the factors, and then you work backwards from your use case and then decide, what should I index on? Is it regulatory? Okay, I have to index on privacy, and then look at where I can. So you fix your focus at one thing and then see where you can trade off based on the use case.
And by the way, not every answer is going to be an LLM. So we also try and keep going with that decision process and think, well, okay, would traditional AI give you the same result? And if it does, you're going to make a big saving in cost and time and effort. Does it even need AI at all? Can you put rules in place? So I think going past Gen AI and not think of it as this hyped solution that's going to do everything for everybody, and really be intentional about where you put your Gen AI dollars.
So glad you mentioned that point, because I know Steven spends a lot of his time on educating or maybe working on behalf of customers to find out whether it's a traditional AI problem, whether it's a generative AI problem, whether it's a machine learning problem at all, or can you just use plain data to solve it, right? Right, Steven, you want to add any point on technology choices or stuff that you do in this area?
Yeah, I think I think it goes back to what I was referring to. I think it's almost like a journey that I'm seeing customers are going through. I often ask is, hey, do you work with traditional AI or just with generative AI? But at the end of the day, I think it goes back to the theme that we keep going back is like we have to work backward from the business problems and challenges. And one of the key observations I've seen, especially in the past 18 months or so, a lot of this conversation, yes, we start off with Gen AI. They have a lot of great use cases, which is great. But almost 80% of that conversation, hey, we should also look into kind of the traditional machine learning, because what has happened is, let's say they want to do forecasting, they want to have a very targeted type of outcome. You may not need generative AI, right? It's a traditional model of using machine learning, using a platform, SageMaker, could solve just as much. Could actually do the job itself. So in a way, I think it's not so much about choosing the technology; it's about working backward from your business problems. And once you're going through the process, and I'm sure like specialists like myself and yourself, then we walk with the customers, saying, hey, what is actually the most effective way? Is it, can you just using, like in math sense, maybe use the LLM and use RAG could do the job? Maybe some customers do need to do fine tuning, or some people maybe need to invest a little bit more on the vector database side, and vice versa. So I guess answer the question is really about working backward from the challenges. Then we could pick and choose and what that journey looks like. Do you want to adapt LLM first, then you tackle the overall data platform? Or you want to build up the holistic data strategy to build up your data foundations and then feed into the LLMs that touches on some of the Gen AI use cases.
Listening to you, although it's been wonderful, like so interesting business, so many interesting use cases in this space. It seems like you have a clear idea on where you are, where you want to go. You have got generative AI, LLMs. I wouldn't say figured out. Yes, you have figured it out, but there's always this uncertainty of where you'll end up. But I see that you are pretty clear, right? What is your take on how RWS is positioned today to serve your customers in this ever-evolving space of AI, linguistic AI in your case?
Yeah, such a good question, because I don't feel like we've got Gen AI figured out in so much as I could tell you every feature that we're going to deliver over 5 years. Have we got a large number of very smart people who've jumped on a new technology and executed that incredibly quickly? Yes. So that's the first thing that we have going for us. The other is that we have a very intentional way of doing innovation. You've mentioned the Amazon way, right? The working backwards, right? So that's the sort of approach that we take. Start with the value, understand why you're doing this thing, and then figure out if you should do it. Because what I definitely see, and this isn't just in my industry, but I see across industries, is what's driven this hype cycle, this absurdly quick journey through the Gartner hype cycle, is that it's right at the top and just moving over the top now, which is that it's been so easy to put solutions together. The access to Gen AI is completely democratized. Anybody can write a prompt and get something out. So it's really easy to get something that looks good. It's really difficult, as it has always been for tens of thousands of years, to invent something which is properly valuable to customers. Right? That's an age-old thing, and that's something that we're really good at. And I think being intentional about what you're going to drive, one of the exercises in working backwards, let's write the press release now. How would we sell this to my customer? Right? And then you go on from there if you can identify those sparks of value. So that's it. I don't think we know what the industry holds. I don't think we know what next month holds in terms of the advances of Gen AI. So who knows? But as long as we're being intentional about what we're innovating on, and we execute, we fail quickly. That was your point. That's a great one. Then that's what's going to bring us success for our customers. But they're not new things. Right? It's a new tool, but the process, is the same. It's really easy to get seduced by this thing that's easy to build, and suddenly you build 1,000 things which nobody needs.
Talking about uncertainty and unknowns, I have a question for both of you. Maybe Stephen, you can start. How do you see your role changing with this fast-changing space with generative AI? And what do you think the future holds for you? I'm pretty sure your role was different 18 months ago than what you're doing now. You can correct me over there, but how do you see it evolving?
Well, on that note, maybe there are a couple of areas that I could, maybe one breadth and one depth, right? I think the breadth aspect is because of generative AI, there's a lot more use cases that I'm working across the value chain. What that means is across different part of the organizations, there's a use case around R&D, finance, and operations, and obviously sales and marketing, engineering, and so forth. So we get a lot more deep into each of the areas, and those are all not just experimentation. These are customers going into productions, and let alone that actually embedding these AI capabilities as part of the software as well. Then as a depth area, I would say one of the areas that I work very closely with our kind of responsible AI team is that we have to, because this, to your point, Matt, is continually evolving. Obviously, GDPR and obviously the regulatory aspect across EMEA, it's also keep on changing. Yeah. How do we ensure to educate ourselves, educate our customers to do the right thing the ethical way, right, when they're leveraging these LLM models? So in a way that we have to, I'm not saying that we're not doing it before, but even much more cognizant and much more intentional to ensure that everything that we built for our customers and what our customers are releasing to their end customers are compliant, based on the most ethical or the best that what we know. So those are kind of the couple areas that I see as really changing the way how I work. And I guess lastly is, I think, which is a positive side, is we get a lot more attentions from the CXOs across the board, right? Because data science is not just around some data science project or experimentation. It is something that is directly connected to a business outcome. So that's why every CEO, including all your leadership team or in the board, are very cognizant about what AI could do for the business. So what that means is, we get a chance to be on the position to guiding that process, so which is a very exciting time for us.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Matt?
Yeah, I think that comment on the CXOs being suddenly interested in some of these aspects, but there's a huge range of interactions that we have. It goes from I know about this opportunity, and I need you to tell me how you're going to solve this problem, all the way back to just a fear of missing out. Right? There's a lot of acceptance that this is the future, but still a bit murky in some areas about how. And I think the first thing that I do, Sandy, is to try and remember that there's no end to this. This is we're probably not even at the beginning, end of the beginning, right? We're certainly nowhere further than that. So this will become software. It'll become another tool in our toolbox. The hype will die down. We'll start talking about something else, but generative AI and whatever comes next is here to stay. And the thing that I'm trying to remind myself daily is that. So, get used to this. Hang on. These it's going to keep evolving, and we need to be ready to figure out how to make the most of it as it does change.
Yeah, and just to add on that point, I think if you talk about from a very tactical level, what I've been really busy on is actually helping customers like Matt and RWS is how to realize value as quickly as possible. Because if you go back to, let's say, a broader data monetization strategy, it could take years. But I guess the beauty of doing this on a cloud is you could actually quickly realize what you could do, with these type of generative AI use cases in months, not years. So that's why I think, to your point, is a journey in a way, right? You're not going to have this one capability built and I'm done for the coming years. It's a continued iterative process, feedback from the customers, and continue to build on. And it could be new paradigms in the future, not just of those three that you mentioned earlier. Yeah, it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah. Good point. And I think having the right data strategy in place is key to be able to pick the needle out of the haystack, right? Choose the right data, right process, and be able to experiment, fail fast, and identify. So you need that underlying framework, whether it is your culture and mindset or experimentation, whether you have got data-driven processes in place to inform your product roadmap, whether you have got the right technologies, cloud, and tools in place to be flexible and agile and do all of these things, is what comes together to be able to do this kind of, deliver this kind of use cases, right?
Yeah.
Really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I'm sure our viewers will gain a lot of knowledge from your experience, Matt, and from yours, Steven. Just to close things off, where can our viewers get in touch with RWS, where they can learn more? Please share some of the resources that you have got.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to understand more about the full range of services, we've only touched a few of them that RWS provide, rws.com. If you'd like to figure out how Evolve can reduce your translation costs for your training module that you've got, Sandy, then just search for RWS Evolve. If you'd like a conversation with me, LinkedIn, Matt Hardy at RWS, find me there.
Thank you, Matt. Steven, where can customers find more information about data, AI, generative AI on AWS?
Yes. So one of the things for those of the audience know that we actually have over 800 digital courses online. That's specifically around everything around the cloud. But a couple of things that you could think about is we have various different mechanisms internally where we could help customers from immersion days to help them to prototype to even, hey, let's say you have already pilot something, you want to put it into production. We have specific workshops in that area. So I guess one of the key areas is you could look for me from LinkedIn as well, Steven Fung. On LinkedIn, I could guide you throughout the process. But one thing I do want to kind of emphasize lastly is that I think this is definitely a very exciting time for ISV. But a couple of key things I think as a kind of the last takeaway is that how do you build out this experimentation culture? I think is really critical. And also, because if you think about it, these capability, to Matt's point, is much more easier to build nowadays. So then what really differentiate is actually your data and your understanding of your customers. So that's why if you're having these two pieces that allows you to build data product much quickly to anticipate the change in the market and your customers, at the same time having the right data infrastructure to support that, I think that is going to be one of the key differentiator for ISV to be trying to stay on top in the market as well. That's kind of my last.
Thank you very much. Really insightful. Thank you, Matt, for joining us, and Steven for joining us again. I'm sure our viewers found it really useful.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy.